Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates. All I ask is that you think.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates, and welcome to this evening's pop-up edition of the Just My 3 Cents podcast, a live interactive podcast where you can jump on and together we can discuss hard conversations on race, sex, and culture, and ultimately together we can raise the culture. So again, I just do these pop-up shows from time to time, and if anybody saw the promotions for earlier today, this is really an extension of our last pop-up show, which was Black Father Custody Battles. And today's show is Black Father Absentees, and by the numbers. So I ended up bringing up something on the last show that sparked a debate last week. And so I said, you know what? Let's explain those numbers since we mentioned them, and we kind of brought them up at the end of the show, so we didn't get to go deep into the numbers. And so if you were fortunate enough to watch last week, I did something I typically don't do for the Just My 3 Cent podcast. If you see behind my head, the mental dialogue, all I ask is that you think. Mental Dialogue is our long 7-year running audio only podcast every Saturday morning, 10 a.m. to Eastern Standard Time. In the Just My 3 Cents podcast, I know everybody is doing the video game. In a sense, everybody's in the game doing video now, and so we just do pop-up shows from time to time when we have an issue that we want to bring to the table. But our regular occurrence is every Saturday morning. And so what I did for last week's Just My 3 Cents podcast pop-up, I invited on what I call one of my Queens of Intellect members. They are basically the queens that we rotate every Saturday morning to ensure that we have, if you will, a woman's perspective on every show. And so I decided to change up the podcast because the goal for the Just My 3 Cents podcast is a quick hitter, hit things. Y'all can jump on with me, bring up issues you want to bring up, and jump on and dialogue with me, if you will. I see I got Dr. G in the background. So Dr. G, I see you are on mute. And if you decide you want to jump in and give your 3 cents, come off the mute button, and I'll bring you live on the screen just in case you didn't know that you can jump on and add, because that's what I do. I really kind of just do a monologue hoping that people will jump on. But last week's show, as I said, I had on my queen Oshun Ojo, and we had the dialogue about Black Father Custody. So I had to kind of set it up to get into why we were doing today's pop-up. And as I said, Black Father Absentee by the numbers, because we brought up some numbers and we dialogued about them all week on Facebook. So I want to share the meme that I wrote right after that show the next day that kicked off 100 plus comment dialogue between myself, other men, other women, Oshun. We went back and forth, and basically in the numbers that I'm about to share, we definitely had two entire interpretations of them. So in order to give y'all the context, I'm going to share my screen and share that actual comment that I made that led to the 100 plus comments and more. I mean, I got called intellectually dishonest and everything. Hey, for those that know me, hey, I may be wrong, but I'm never going to intentionally give you some information or use confirmation bias to provide information. So we're going to get into the numbers so that people can understand why I suggested last week, because I didn't know that it was going to kick off this much fervor, if you will. Last week at the end of the show, I suggested that there were more involved fathers in the Black community than there are deadbeat fathers. And that kicked off a whole thing, especially once I brought some of the numbers to the table. So give me a second. Let me share this screen so y'all can see exactly where I took it. And I will tell you, I'll give you a little insight for those who are maybe new to our platform. And I do this on the show. I'll play devil's advocate on the show and things of that nature. But on the Facebook page, I'm always advertising anything that we're doing. And so sometimes I will create a meme, if you will, to create dialogue. So that's kind of what I was doing. We had that conversation. It sparked some interest. And so I decided to create a meme, and I provided some numbers. And if you are familiar with this, is just to give a little context. If you're familiar with how Facebook memes work, when you put the color backgrounds, they have limited words. And so, all right, let me share the screen. I hope I'm sharing the screen. All right, hold on. What did I do here? Okay, I scroll down. All right, here it is. All right, I'm gonna reach out to Dr. G real quick. I know he's in the background. I'm hoping y'all can see the screen. It just looks a little different to me for some reason. I'm going to read this to y'all just in case y'all can't see the screen. I know y'all can read for yourselves. But anyway, I made the comment that there were more involved fathers in the African American community than there are deadbeats. And so I gave, again, a few stats that I gathered from the census and some other studies and just kind of put it all together to make this comment. I said the majority of Black men hate deadbeat dads and would never be one. Currently, 40 to 50% of talking about Black men have no children. 33% of Black men are married, and of the unmarried fathers, plenty are involved. Low marriage rates, but most involved. And that should say, but most are involved. So let me just kind of tell you how this comment went a lot further. And I will, like I say, I admit, I put it up to intentionally challenge a specific narrative, and that narrative being, there is a narrative in our community, and y'all can come on and tell me if I'm right or wrong about this. Let me stop sharing my screen so I can see if anybody else is trying to jump on. Hold on. So you can tell me if I'm right or wrong about this, but there's a narrative that people suggest that most Black men are deadbeat dads. That's the narrative in its simplest forms. There's, you can weave it certain ways, but in general, within our community, there's this concept that most Black men are deadbeat dads. And so what I was doing there, I just kind of highlighted, well, half the brothers don't even have children, so we can't even get into that. So again, the narrative is just simply most Black men are deadbeat fathers. So when that's the narrative that's out there, that's including even amongst the men who do or don't have children, when the narrative is simplified down to its simplest form. So the initial part of highlighting that 40 to 50% of brothers don't have children was just kind of highlighting, well, that narrative is almost cut off just by the fact that half the Black men, not boys, Black men don't have children. Now, so that became a point of contention if you go look at the comments on that post. So the big point of contention was how many brothers actually have children. And so as I did as much research as I could to kind of back it up, I was trying to find it out by demographics, but the number that I was able to find, and myself as well as Oshun, who was on with me, agreed upon, well, just in general, that the overall numbers are there were 60% of men over 15 with children and 40% of adult men who don't have children. So for that context, that's that 40% that I put 40 to 50%. So probably maybe not 50% of brothers, but we know just by the general consensus of all men, at least 40% of Black men don't have children. So I was just using that to initially attack the concept that most brothers are deadbeats. Then I went into the fact that 33% of brothers are married. I'm pointing that out because it doesn't mean just simply because you're married, you may not have a child, with a previous woman that that you are or not a deadbeat too, if you will, or whatever. But I'm just pointing out the marriage rate for Black men to say, okay, well, if you got the 40% of men who are, in a sense, don't have children, and you have this other 33% of men that are married, in general, if you're at home with your child, you're not going to be labeled a deadbeat for the most part. That's different than how good or bad of a father you are. I'm talking about particular deadbeat. Matter of fact, let me be clear here and explain the definition of deadbeat that I'm going by to use this context. So the deadbeat, in a sense, the term that I'm using, it comes from, in a sense, how it was started within the legal field, right? There's an urban dictionary, urban definition that's more broader, and we can play into that. But just from the basis, a deadbeat, when I looked it up, by definition, just says a father who owes money to his former wife or child's mother to help raise their children, but does not pay it. So that is the base form of where we get the concept of deadbeat from, is a deadbeat is not paying their child support. That's the simplest form, but I will also include, like most sisters do, any brother who's really not involved. So not only are they not paying, but their little to no involvement is absolutely a deadbeat. So again, I don't want to narrate. I'm not trying to be right strictly by the definition, but I did want to clarify that when I'm using the term deadbeat, I am saying those who are not paying very little, not involved, or involved very little. And so And again, highlighting the marriage brothers is the 33% of married men is saying that in general, based on that definition, if you are at home with your child, you're more than likely in most cases are not going to be a deadbeat, but that's not all married brothers, but in general. And so then I said, plenty of brothers who are not of the ones that are left, plenty of those brothers are involved. And so that was a general way that I came to the conclusion that more fathers are involved. There was other numbers that I could not put in the meme that I'm going to share right now because I say by the numbers, but I made the meme a little vague because I wanted to create the dialogue to challenge the thing that we talked about on last week's show, which is culturally, we are not, in a lot of cases, we're not consciously having our children anymore because we've normalized this way that we have children. And so that conversation triggered a lot of sisters. And one of the sisters on the comments, just to highlight some of this, went right to how can that be the case? There's 73% of children being, that are, born to single parents or whatever. And I explained, and this is why we're doing by the numbers tonight. I wanted to explain my understanding of the numbers. Anybody can jump on and say, hey, if you interpret that wrong, we are here to dialogue and figure it all out. And so what I explained is that 73% of Black children being born out of wedlock is a different number. And that alone does not say how many of those children fathers are involved or not. And that's partly where, let me start there. That number, 73%, is the start of what I am saying is a bad narrative. The bad narrative simply being that most Black men are deadbeat fathers. And so what happens is we've been hearing that 72 and 73% of Black children being born out of wedlock for so long. I want to show you how media narratives work. And in a sense, a narrative can be factual, but quite often when it is repeated over and over, there's a lack of context. And that's what I want to provide tonight is the context to show, again, this is not me, Montoya Smith, simply trying to say that more Black fathers are involved for the sake of saying it. As I go through this context, I'm also going to conclude with why presenting these numbers correctly actually matter. Because when I put the post up, I remember one sister said, well, just because you say it is such, doesn't make it true. And so what ended up happening was, again, I'm gonna walk through it. I'm just kind of giving them much context as possible. So what happens is I found during the week, people were wanting to hang on to the narrative. And so naturally they wanted me to prove my numbers, which is understandable. And I get that. And what I ended up finding, what happened during the week, from what I could interpret, because some people were saying I was interpreting the numbers incorrectly. Some people even tried to suggest that the numbers were incorrect. And then as people looked up the numbers, it wasn't that my numbers were incorrect, but we definitely, myself and Oshun, if you will, she was on the show, we came to different conclusions. So I invited her to come on this show. Maybe she didn't have time or whatever, or didn't want to come on, but I invited her because we went back and forth for days on the post. So I invited her. I said, let's talk about how we see these numbers. So I'm going to share how I came to my conclusions. And again, you can jump on and challenge these conclusions if you disagree, or maybe you will learn something. Again, the 73% of children out of wedlock is the number that we've been hearing for a whole bunch of years. And so again, somebody put that number up as a way to say, well, what you're saying can't be true, not realizing that the number of babies doesn't tell you whether a parent is involved or not, right? And so that's what I said. With that number alone, which I'm not surprised that somebody put it up, because I know that number created the dialogue that most Black men are deadbeats. Because what happens is, unfortunately, men and women have multiple children. And so you will see a lot of cases. It could be definitely one child or, two, but you can see a lot of cases where there are several children in a home who are not, in a sense, looked out for by their father, if you will. And so when you go to a school system and say, hey, look at all these kids, well, some of those kids are brothers and sisters that are not being taken care of by these damn deadbeats. Because I say damn deadbeats because what got overlooked the most, as people were trying to negate and say and suggested there are more deadbeats than there are involved fathers, what got overlooked was the meme started with that the good brothers hate deadbeats, We hate deadbeats because we know how much damage they cause to our community. We're not happy about the 73% whatsoever. And what happens is brothers who are involved absolutely can't stand deadbeats because a lot of them are trying to live out what they didn't get from their father. So that makes them be involved. Some men, psychologically based on their own life, will repeat what was done to them. So I'm not saying that every man responds to in their own life, because now we're several generations in. We don't get to 73% all of a sudden. It was in 1964 that the Monahan report came out and said when we were at 25%, particularly the black community at 25%, while the rest of the country was around 11% of out of wedlock births, that was announced there was a crisis when it was 25%. So since 1964, all the way up until now, we're at 72, 73% seems to be the number. And that it took all those years, but they said we were at crisis at 25%. So clearly we know we're at crisis. And so what we do by nature is you keep hearing that number and you think and it is an increase of more people doing it. So I don't want to get it wrong, but we don't understand the multiplier when you start talking about multiple children. But here's the number that I did not put in the meme that makes this real simple. And again, I don't want to bore y'all with numbers, so I'm gonna go ahead and get to the number that I left out. And I left out because I wanted to create dialogue. I didn't leave it out to be deceitful. And plus, I wouldn't have been able to fit it anyway. If you understand how the Facebook memes work, like I left out the word "most are involved." By me posting "most involved," Oshun thought I was talking about the CDC. Just to give another side note to how a meme, if you can't get all the words you need, it can change the meaning of your meme. And so I didn't even realize this until she pointed it out. But when I ended that meme with that most involved, she thought I was referring to the CDC report that talked about how African-American men are the most involved if fathers, if they're in the home or if they're outside the home. She was like, you must be alluding to that. I wasn't alluding to that, but I absolutely understood because I left out the word "are" because I couldn't fit it in. It looks like I was referring to that study. I did highlight that the study does distinguish how black fathers are inside the home compared to other races inside the home versus how black fathers are compared to other races outside the home. A lot of black men have like the sisters pointed out, rightfully so, on my post. A lot of black men have mistakenly misread that. Just to again highlight the side note, a lot of black men have misread that CDC study and take it as if all black men, even if you're outside the home, not all black men, I shouldn't say never, that wasn't that. I don't like to talk in extremes, but a lot of people misread the CDC study to think that it is saying that even black men outside the home are doing better than other races with those men at home. They don't distinguish that it breaks out based on home arrangement. So a black father who is inside the home along with other races seems to be more active based on that study than other races if there are two inside the home. What the study doesn't say, and this is what a lot of black men get wrong, is they think that even if they're outside the home, the study proves that they are doing better than other races of men that are even inside the home. And so the sisters quickly point that out. And as we were dialoguing, they kept overlooking that I was agreeing with that part. And again, I wasn't even alluding to the study just because it left out the word "are." So it's an understandable mistake and I couldn't fit it in. So I just wanted to get that clarity. So back to, in a sense, the bigger point. In my opinion, the bigger point was highlighting a couple of things. The false narrative that I am attacking, and I think the numbers do support, are that most black fathers are involved, want to be involved. Obviously, there's back and forth sometimes where that makes it difficult between the man and woman. But in general, most fathers are involved. Whereas when you put all the numbers in context, it becomes innumerably impossible to suggest that most are not, in my opinion. And here's the key number. So did a lot of research and I was able to find the exact numbers because what happened was, here's a number I was using when I made the meme after last Sunday's show, or it was like a week and a half ago now. Here's a number I had in my head that I couldn't put in the meme. One sister corrected me on, and now I've even found a more accurate number than what the sister corrected me on. So part of me in making that revelation, creating a meme to increase to intentionally create dialogue, one of the numbers that I did not share was There was a study that was by race that was showing that even with the 73%, this has been in 2004 now. And so I didn't have the updated information. But at the time that I made the meme, I didn't have the updated information. So I was still going by a number I've been using for a lot of years, which was, even though for years they've thrown a 73% out there to you, 56% of fathers live with their children. We're not marrying, which is another point that I'm going to make here later, but 56% of Black men were living with their fathers. I've been knowing that since 2004. And again, for those who know me, that know me closely, they know I've always been a researcher and love numbers. And so what you're hearing is me putting several studies together to provide more context than just simply seeing the 73% number and assuming that there are a whole bunch of, that there are much more, I should say, because there are, let me say this clear too, because it's something that always gets misunderstood. There are too many damn deadbeats and there are plenty of them. Let me say that, because what happens, me highlighting that the majority of Black men, for a lot of sisters, they were receiving it as if I was saying there wasn't that many deadbeats. Didn't say that. You know, majority is the majority. I'm going to show you some numbers that make it real clear. So there are way too many deadbeats, and there are plenty of them. So let me get that out, because that context gets lost just by me pointing out the numbers will prove what I'm saying. And again, as I share these numbers, if you disagree, please jump on. If you agree, jump on and give your 3 cents. But with that said, so the number I had been using when I first put the meme up was that I had known since 2004. I probably looked at it in 2005 or 6. I didn't look at it right when it came out. But I've been knowing for almost a decade that there were plenty of fathers living with their children, despite the 73% of children, because I'm trying to show you the context of those two different numbers, that 56% of brothers were living with their children. So by the definition that I used, just a regular definition of where deadbeat comes from. So for the most part, for the sake of generalizing, because there's always one-off, and there's always specifics, there are always fathers at home that are deadbeats, even though they're living at home. So I want to put that out there, but for the context of this conversation in general, there's a narrative that most Black men are deadbeats. Myself and Oshun saw the overall numbers that at least 40% of people don't even have children. So that takes away the meme in itself of it being most Black men. But let's go ahead and get into it just in the context of fathers only. So that leaves the fathers only. And so the dialogue that Oshun was pushing back on, which is fair, is, well, even if the fathers left, she said thinks that there's more deadbeats than there are involved fathers. I'm not talking about good and bad fathers. Those are two different things. And I'm not just simply saying paying your child support is enough. Not saying that. I'm trying to be clear for people that are just not jumping on. So I see some people jumping on. So I don't want them to take what I'm saying because they didn't hear the beginning where I gave the context. So she still was saying, holding on to the narrative, right? And so the number, again, I keep highlighting this, was 56%. So I knew that 56%. So there's another part I put in the meme that said, and there are plenty of fathers who are not living with their children who are involved. So if 56% were living, that's already over half of Black fathers living with their children. That's already over half. And then we can admit that there is a percentage of the fathers who are not living with their children who are also involved. So that in itself was highlighting part of what I'm saying. It was a number that I did not put in the meme. I actually, luckily, just a couple of days ago, found the exact number, and I'm going to share my screen. And that's the part. This is the part I want to dialogue about. Okay. So I'm going to show you numbers that, again, if you've only heard 73%, if you've always bought into the narrative and never seen these numbers, or if you think I'm interpreting them wrong, that's okay. All right, so let me share my screen again. I found the exact numbers. One sister sent me a post from the kids' data bank or something, and it was showing that 43% of brothers live with their children. That was their number, and I actually thanked her for correcting my number because she had a more updated number. So again, I'm not trying to be right. You give me some more correct information. Let's take it in and let's analyze it. That's all. You just take it. Someone who understands statistics. I took one class, so I'm not an expert in statistics. But when you take a little statistics, you can understand the numbers, and you won't convolute. For example, 73% of children out of wedlock to assume that there's more deadbeats than there really are if you understand statistics, somewhat. So that's what we're doing. We're going by the numbers. So let me share the screen finally, and I'm going to show you the exact number. And this is pretty interesting. Again, we're talking about the dialogue is are most two things. The basic one is are most black men deadbeats, or we can separate it out, which is a better conversation. Or the black men who are fathers, are the majority of them deadbeats or not? And that's actually a more fairer context. Again, I was breaking down the just the plain narrative. Here we go. So I think I'm sharing this correctly. All right, where is this at? Here's the study right here. So this is a 2020 study taken from the U.S. Census Bureau. Hope y'all can see this, but I'll say it just in case y'all can't. And I want to let's focus on the black, like if you can see my screen here. So of the black, this is the living arrangement. This is a thing that typically you're never going to hear this number when you keep hearing the 73% out of wedlock. Again, when you keep hearing a number over and over, it's always there's definitely a narrative typically being pushed, and there's no context to go with it. So you have to go look at other studies to give it context. So here's actual living arrangement for children 18 and under. So for children 18 and under, looking at the black people specifically, it says the two-parent homes, that's 37.9% of children 18 and under are living with two married parents in the black community. There's 3.4%, not a lot, with two parents that are not married. Then the other number that I would put with it, again, we're talking about are the majority of fathers involved or not. There's a 4.5% of the pink is all of the single mothers. As you can see, of all the different communities, we have a problem. We have a huge problem. So again, me pointing out that there are more involved fathers is not me suggesting that we don't have a deadbeat father problem. I'll get the end. I'm going to end it with why this narrative actually matters, because again, I'm not suggesting we don't have a deadbeat father problem. I am putting in context that the narrative is not correct, and we'll talk about why it becomes necessary to correct it. So 4.5% of brothers are single fathers living with their children. And then this last 8%, unfortunately, are all the children who they're not living with either one of their parents. And that number, again, as you can see, is significantly higher for our community and others. Now you're talking about quite often the foster, people that are children are in foster care. Our children quite often, quote unquote, age out of foster care. So I'm not trying to run from anything that is a serious problem of ours. However, even if something is a serious problem, I'm going to tell you why having the truth versus a narrative still matters, even though something is a problem. Because again, me highlighting that there were more good fathers, unfortunately, I think for some sisters, they received it, and one of the sisters put in the meme saying, oh, we're acting like there's no problem here. That was never suggested. Again, black men hate deadbeats too. We don't hate them for no reason, just because they're deadbeats. We hate them because of the damage they do to our community. But if you take these numbers, you basically add up 37.9, 3.4, as well as 4.5. That right now, today, as of 2020, 45.8% of black men live with their children. 46.3% of sisters live with, 46.3 sisters, single mothers, have their children by themselves. So because pretty much, let me make sure I make this real clear, because it sounds like I almost made a mistake. So I want to make sure I'm being clear and people understand I'm not misinterpreting the numbers. So when you look at all the numbers, for the most part, only 12.5% of black children don't have their mothers living with them in our community, because the mothers are obviously included in both married parent situations and the unmarried. And then a lot of mothers, unfortunately, as you see, 46.3, the next closest is Hispanic. They're at almost less than half of us. So again, this is not suggesting that there is no problem. However, why did I suggest that these numbers, in my eyes, the way I'm interpreting them, prove that there are more fathers involved than not? Because what happens is, if we're going to go by the pretty much the simplest definition, which I already said was a deadbeat is someone who doesn't pay all they should pay, or not involved, or very little involved. That is a deadbeat. So if we kind of can say, for the sake of this conversation, that if a man is at least living at home, again, not highlighting the exceptions of men who are at home and don't do nothing. Again, that's rating how good or bad the father is. I'm talking about the definition of involved versus deadbeat. So if we're going to say that 45% of men that are at home, if we would pretty much assume, and you can come on and tell me if this is a fair or bad assumption, but if we can assume that the majority of them are probably involved, and then we got the 46.3% of single mothers, well, if 20% of those men are involved, then that 45% goes to 65%. So there's still way too single mothers that have no involvement from the Black men. Because what I will assume, out of the single mothers who are at home by themselves raising their children, here's what I am willing to say, and y'all come in and challenge this if y'all don't think this is right. I am willing to say that based on the problems we have in our community, that the majority of those men are not handling their business. So that's why I would say if just 20%, because we do know that there are plenty of men outside the home that do take care of their kids, and the mother will vouch for that. And when I say plenty, I'm talking about plenty out of the millions of Black fathers in the country. So when I say plenty, I'm just talking about the out of millions. So 20% of millions is a lot, is plenty, is what I mean. I'm not saying plenty more, because I just clarified that I absolutely believe of this 46.3%, I don't think over half of those men are handling their business outside the home when a mother just has the children themselves. I don't think that at all. But if you can give me that the 37.9 who are married, the men who are not married to the mother of their child but living with them, that's that 45. And plus the men by themselves, that's 45.8% of brothers who are at home with their children. So if you give me the majority of that number and just 20% of this 46.3, the men who are not at home with their children, is that not a fair assumption that the majority of brothers are handling their business? So that's how I come to the conclusion, because people are saying that I misinterpreted the numbers, not understanding I'm using all of these numbers for context, because people, I'll say this, it was sad to watch the sisters, in my opinion, want to hang on to this idea of there are more Black men who are deadbeats than are not. I don't know what purpose that is serving us. Now let's get to the bigger point, and I'm going to end the show with a piece that I wrote. So the whole bigger point was to recognize that, one, the majority of men want to be involved with their fathers. That's a narrative that we don't even understand, even though these numbers, in my opinion, easily show that is the case. And so by being unaware of this, got some comments. I'm just jumping in the comments. I'm sorry, y'all. Okay, so I was trying to see if there's any comments, anything I need to respond to specifically. So if I'm able to show that, now let's show how that matters in today's context. So I went back and forth, and again, I wish those sisters would have come on and tell me if they think I'm interpreting these numbers wrong. But it is a sincere attempt by me, but not an attempt from a biased position. Again, keep in mind, I knew about this number in 10 years ago. So because I knew that 6% of men live, something that most people have never heard, again, that number is not the case today, but if you remember the earlier part of this thing, think about me watching the 73%, later seeing the CDC study, also seeing the study done by Avery Tosin out of Howard. He was the first to do it even before the CDC. That's a brother I definitely highly recommend. Again, I'm a numbers person, so I like researching or whatever. And I highlighted for some of the sisters I was going back and forth. Like now, because everything's online, back in the day, you could almost find every study online. Now they put the deeper views of the study behind paywalls. So now sometimes it's harder to get the demographics, because I pointed out some other numbers that I'm been having some trouble finding. So I just wanted to share that real quick. But anyway, back to, if you can understand why I'm saying that if just 20% of those men are 20, I would even offer it could be 20 to 30%, but let's just say it's just 20%. That's at least 65% of men who are handling their business. Here's why this thing matters, because again, I triggered those sisters to want to fight. In their eyes, I heard the sisters call this facts, that it's facts that the majority of men are deadbeats that are fathers. They call that facts, although the numbers that they presented to me was mostly focused on how many men were fathers or not fathers. So the numbers that Oshun kept explaining to me in her interpretation, that there were way more fathers than I was given credit for. I would have loved to say to her today, but even in having more fathers, how does that prove that more are involved or not? So just that even if I'm wrong about the 40% of black men who are not fathers, it still doesn't change the fact that most fathers live, that 45% of fathers live with their children, and we can assume there's a percentage of those that don't, that handle their business. That's what I would have loved to say to her today if she would have, been able to jump on. And she may have an interpretation I don't understand. Because again, I'm not saying I'm right, but I hope people can see that this is a sincere thought. And again, I've been knowing it when it was 56%. Now it's down to 45%, which makes sense because the numbers are going in the wrong direction. And that's the bigger point of the meme. So while I wanted to, in a sense, highlight and address the false narrative, and here's ultimately why this matters. So the false narrative is something that within the gender war we keep speaking to. And so what happens is, just like as an individual, anything that you keep speaking to will come to pass. So when I highlight, based on these numbers that you've heard me break down now, that the majority of fathers are involved, want to be involved, which goes totally against the narrative. And we have sisters who want to hold to the narrative. I'm not faulting them or judging them. I get how and why it's done. But when you hold to the narrative, you literally are wanting to hold that things are more dysfunctional than they really are. And so then let me describe this one last number, and I'll read this piece and get off this thing. So another thing that got pointed out that there was a point of contention for some of the sisters was, I was highlighting that unfortunately, while the deadbeats are less than the majority of fathers, right? The ones that are not handling their business. The other part is they do so much damage because there is a small percentage, and I've looked this up, like 1/7 of them, of the deadbeats who are not handling their business, that have multiple baby mothers. And so what happens is the deadbeats end up doing more damage because, let's say a deadbeat has 3 baby mothers, that's 3 mothers that obviously are going to complain about how the dad is no good. And so the reason that context matters, again, as I said, black men, we hate deadbeats. We definitely hate the ones that all they do is drop a load, make a baby, move on, drop a load, make a baby, and move on, right? And so what happens is they end up affecting more mothers. So, for example, one number I was able to find, this is the last numbers I'll give you, and I'll read this piece. So, for example, of all men, whether that's married men or single men that have children but are not married, of all men, 17% of men have 28% of all the children. And I'm going to explain this, get a little technical here. So there's always going to be a multiplier on the end where you can have, and for deadbeats, I'm going to call these mothers victims because, again, they're not helping these mothers. These deadbeats have mothers who are victims of these no good brothers not handling their business. So 17% of men have 28% of children. So that means of all the rest of men, which would be, 18% have 28%. So that means that's 18%. So 82% has the other 72%. So 80% have 72%, but that 18% has a multiplier of 1.5 that gets you to 28%. So they have 28% of the children. Well, when it comes to mothers, it actually has to be more. That the men that have multiple, just like they can have children, this is how it has to be more. Because for men that are going to handle their business, here's a generalized idea. So you got the man that's going to find a wife, stay with his wife, and it'll be that mother and all his children, whether that's 1 child or 5 children, but that's one mother that can vouch for him. All right. Or what's realistic in the black community, because unfortunately, as you saw with those numbers I showed you earlier, it is a problem with the number of men who are not marrying our women, right? So what happens with other brothers who are involved and handle their business, they may do the typical, maybe they had a child when they was young, then they married later, and they was involved in their first child, and now they're involved with their wives. Or they may marry once, take care of their children, marry a second time, take care of their children. Because for the most part, a brother who even that makes a decent living understands he cannot continue to spread his seeds thin between multiple women and still handle his business, whether he's in or outside the home. So I'm saying that because there ends up being a cap on the end of all these involved brothers that I'm highlighting in these numbers. There's a cap on how many women they may have between them. Plenty will have one woman, whether it's a wife or one baby mother. And for the most part, maybe two. Now, where there'll be some extremes, like, yeah, there are going to be some extremes of men that, have 3, 4 baby mothers and all the mothers will vouch for them. But let's admit, we know that's a rarity. So on the other end, and I told you, there is according to the latest study, there about 1/7 of the men that have multiple mothers of baby mothers. I don't like using that word, but it is what it is. So for the men that have multiple baby mothers, unfortunately, there's a small percentage that they have 3, 4 plus baby mothers. So what happened during the dialogue this week, when I put out that there are more good fathers, some sisters took the post to say, are you denying all of these mothers' stories that have these terrible situations with these men? I'm not denying it at all. All right, let me see what he says. Can you see or do an extrapolation of the correlation of the adverse effect of childhood? Those studies are out there, James. There's plenty of studies that show you, but to show you, unfortunately, like the data of different different homes, and in a sense, like for example, a child that comes from a single parent is 9 times likely to go to jail. Like there's all kind of studies on that or whatever. And so again, I was just doing it. I'm specifically talking about the number of men and why, knowing that the majority of Black men want to be involved, how that number is important to go against the narrative. So I'm kind of sticking in that place versus getting into the specific things. But again, most brothers, we hate deadbeats because we know they're damaging our community in a major, major way. And the numbers are not pretty. So I've never said that. But me just even pointing out that the majority of brothers want to be involved and actually are involved based on these numbers triggered sisters, some sisters, not all, because there were sisters that agree with me as well, that triggered them to want to hold to the narrative that most brothers are deadbeats and not realize the number of women the deadbeats touch. Like they didn't want to, and I wasn't trying to make them own that. It just comes out through the extrapolation of the numbers. I don't give a damn about that. The reason I don't give a damn about it is because the challenge now becomes, because here's what's ultimately been normalized. And this is the biggest point of the meme. Because what's been normalized is, since a lot of brothers do handle their business as shown by my numbers, and I say a lot of brothers, the majority, since the brothers handle their business, what a lot of good brothers do is normalize that it is okay to do it from outside the home. It's a band-aid compared to staying in the home. And to your point, James, when you start putting family arrangements of children's outcomes, it is not even close, even amongst step parents, on how well, in general, because there's bad in all arrangements, all the way down to the single mother, to with a boyfriend living, with the father living. There's all these different arrangements, but in general, none of them compare to two biological parents being at home. And we've done these shows on the Mental Dialogue Talk Show where I've played, for example, psychologist Jordan Peterson, highlighting whether we want to recognize this or not. But it's hard to raise children. Nobody would disagree with that. But it's so hard that raising someone else's children is not something that the average person wants to do. And even him highlighting that, he says there are excellent step parents out here. So even in pointing out that there are excellent step parents, the reality is, based on the aggregate, that is the anomaly. It's hard enough to raise your own child. So all other arrangements typically do not compare, because even two biological parents can be terrible. And a lot of times when people hear these these things, they want to jump to the extreme cases of bad biological parents, because nobody's saying that just being married and staying together in itself is enough. But we are highlighting the reality that we've lost sight of in our culture, which goes back to what I said in the beginning of this show. Last week, we talked about the fact that to a degree, there's a large part of our culture who no longer consciously has children. Consciously having children is realizing how difficult it is to have children. And I might want to vet who I have them with, because we're going to be in this together at least 18 years if it's one child, at least 20 years. And at the end of the day, like all parents say, you never stop mothering or fathering your children, no matter how old they get. But as far as, in a sense, producing a productive adult with both inputs, that's hard enough in itself. And we've normalized it. So we have a lot of band-aids and these remedies that we have to put in place because we've normalized doing it outside of marriage. And so here's the mistake we make with a bad narrative. Here's the point of why I say we have to address that narrative. So what happens is, because we've normalized having children outside of marriage as a culture, unfortunately, because we normalize it, all the solutions are solutions that accept the narrative. So the narrative is that there are more deadbeats than there are good fathers. So the solutions based off something that's not factual will be solutions based on something that's not factual. And I always say that when you make the wrong assessment from the beginning, how can you have a correct solution? But when you understand the reality that there's, despite the 73% out of wedlock that's still going in the wrong direction, but when you realize most fathers are involved, want to be involved, now we can have a dialogue about what those fathers should be doing that's better than what they're currently doing. Because here's the worst aspect of believing this bad narrative. So the worst aspect of believing that the majority of Black men are deadbeat fathers, there are some men that they give themselves too much, rationalize and give themselves too much props simply because they're not behind on child support. Ass ain't no good. But in an environment where the thought is the majority of Black men, that's the original narrative, the majority of Black men are deadbeats, you start getting kudos for doing shit you're supposed to do. And if you get kudos for shit you're supposed to do, which is the minimum, nobody, you walk around bragging about doing some minimal shit. So therefore, you're not even considering what you really should be doing in the upbringing of that child. Because when you start looking at the outcomes, they're never close to two biological parents at home with their children. So the dialogue that I'm having is not to go fix it for, in a sense, those who have done it whichever way, and definitely not degrading anybody who's done it the best they can or have done well, or as long as, because I love great co-parenting. Again, great co-parenting is a fix for the current condition. We've just over-exaggerated the current condition and we give too much props. So we don't even think about, one, what we could do to do better, and the reality of that is still going in the wrong direction. And ultimately, being outside the home, you have less control and you risk more children copying what we're currently doing. So the bigger issue is we don't speak to the next generation the proper information for them to improve upon what has, in a sense, failed the community thus far. So I put out this meme off the strength of that show to raise the culture and have a better and stronger dialogue about what needs to be said, what parents should be saying. Because if you are a father who isn't, let's say, not married to either one of your children, and both your, and you have a great co-parenting, I'm saying both of your, so you're the father with two baby mothers and you have a great relationship with both, for example, say if that is your situation and, she respects you, she applauds you for what you're doing, what kind of conversations are you having with if let's say you got sons with both, what conversations are you having with your sons about not repeating what you did if you've settled into, I've done a pretty good job. I'm better than all these deadbeats over here. I'm better than the majority of black men who are deadbeats. If you also, as a man, have bought into the narrative because you keep hearing the 73% too much, again, getting props. Again, they're your children. You should be involved, right? We all understand that. And until y'all credit black men, most of you are. So again, I'm not challenging the I'm saying let's go to a higher place. And in my opinion, believing that the majority of black men or black fathers are deadbeats never takes us to a higher conversation. And as I said last week on the video show and I think I said this on maybe on Saturday show, and I may be wrong on that, but either way, as I said, we spend too much time, especially on social media, trying to yell at irresponsible people and forcing them to be responsible. We really think that we can hold other adults accountable, where the conversation I'm trying to have us have is one in which when you have an intact family, there is no more influence or accountability you will ever have than the children you have provision over. And as they grow older, eventually they will grow into adults and your provision becomes less and less because they make their own decisions. But you have your most influence about the responsibility that your son and daughter will take because they're under you, or like a lot of good brothers, as I always love to highlight, I was an after school program for the past 7 years. We enjoy mentoring children because we have an opportunity to influence them in a better direction than our culture is going. But what we spend time in the gender war doing is literally mistakenly men are yelling at women about what they should be doing, and women are yelling at black men about what they should be doing, and that they should be holding each other accountable. And the reality is, like I said, this is the perfect example of how you cannot hold another person accountable. And I wrote this on the post last week when it was going back and forth with those shooting them. I said, if black men could hold other black, because what happens is, I explained on the show last week that unaccountable people do not like to be around accountable people. And people don't really understand that because they just never think about it. But the reality is there's this concept that Oshun said last week. She said in her experience, black men don't hold other men accountable. And I explained to her that in real life, black men that are accountable and unaccountable men are all in water in real life. It's not just men. This is like as a woman, if you're hearing this for the first time, if you think about your circle and you consider yourself accountable, do you even have anybody in your circle that's not accountable? It's not human nature for unaccountable people because they don't want accountability, so they avoid us, right? That just happens with men and women, but specifically because we always hear this concept that black men don't hold each other accountable. And I explain we have a fairy tale idea of what accountability looks like. And here's the biggest proof of it. This is the best example. The best example is if I, as a father, say my daughter gets pregnant as a teenager by some young man. Well, obviously I want that young man to handle his business. But in the event that he doesn't, whether his family doesn't encourage him to, or even if they're encouraging him to, in the event that he doesn't take care of his business, there's nothing I can do. I use this example because, again, we really confuse what accountability looks like to someone who doesn't want to be accountable. So what happens is when you raise your family, bring up your children, here's what provision really looks like, because we never think about it in today's age. So what provision really looks like is when, even if you were say you grew up in maybe a neighborhood where there's not a lot of money, but you have been raised to understand your responsibility and your provision as a man, if you will. Or, maybe you're raised by your father, if you will, right? And so ultimately what a man and a woman should or want to do, which is to get into a living situation, for example, where the values outside your home are reinforced. And so what a responsible father typically will do will try to get in a situation where they can live in a place where the values are understood within the community, within the school. And so what I'm alluding to, just showing you what accountability actually looks like, is built with the foundation of the family, and you live in places where it's reinforced outside of yourself. I know a sister who just recently moved from Chicago to get away from what was going on in her neighborhood, to get away from it. And unfortunately, she just highlighted that, her baby's father was involved, but he didn't want to make the move. It is what it is. But I'm just highlighting that you can't hold other people accountable in the way that we yell at each other. We yell at irresponsible people, asking them to be responsible. You only can hold people accountable that you have provision over. And so most men would like to get themselves in a position where they can live in a neighborhood where their children are not learning some of the values you might learn in some of those neighborhoods, right? You want it to be reinforced outside in the community and at school. So you must live in a neighborhood where your children are up against what the streets may teach them. And I hope I'm making sense with that. But let me see. I got some comments here. All right. So let's see. Not for real. The conversation in posts from married women are just as bad, if not worse, than our singles folk. Michelle, jump on real quick and tell me what. Maybe I don't know. I don't think I'm understanding. I understand a little bit what you're saying. I just don't know if I understand how it relates exactly. Because even with because I'll say this, even if you're, yeah, this is what I think I understand you saying. So yeah, you will hear bad conversations from people that are married, especially online. Because I always highlight, don't forget, we now have a platform to come complain every day, and people that are too busy handling their business with their family are not online saying, "Oh, my family's great." You might, when the people are going well, you might have one post. When things are going bad, there's going to be a lot of complaints. So I definitely understand that you're going to hear a lot of complaining from married. Again, I'm not suggesting, I'm not. Again, that's maybe, I may hope I'm understanding what you're saying there, but I just want to highlight that even in hearing that, it doesn't conclude that the best way in general is, and it's like crazy. Like I said this, I definitely said this on last week's show, that my hashtag healthy marriage before children is actually controversial today or whatever. And so me highlighting that the majority of Black men are involved was actually a point of contention, when again, the numbers clearly show. I think my interpretation is pretty easy to understand. But with that said, I'm gonna go ahead and read this piece and get off this thing. Somebody jumped on with me today. Dang, I just realized I did not ever stop sharing the screen. So I've been in the corner the whole time. That's funny. All right, cool. All right, let me read this piece and we got this thing. Thank y'all for the comments and watching. Make sure y'all, I always forget to say share this. We could have shared it with other people while y'all are watching. All right, this is a piece. Again, the responsibility, I want to go to the higher conversation. Let's raise the culture. So even if you are handling your business, Black man, when in regards to your children, that in itself is not alone. The bigger responsibility is making sure that mother is taken care of to do that. And some men are doing that as well, even if it's one or two. So again, I'm applauding you for doing your thing, but we are culturally raising the next generation not to see the importance of raising the children inside the home. So that means you have to do a better job of vetting of who the most important decision you'll ever make is who you will raise your children with. And we're not always putting a lot of thought into it, if we're honest, even if you're going to handle your business. So the challenge is to go even higher. So this piece, coming from our upcoming book, Re-Education of the Negro, the pieces are called Black Socrates Speaks, and this one particularly is to Black men. All Black men, stop arguing over who has it worse in America between the Black man and Black woman, especially since America still has its foot on both of our necks. However, for Black men in general, we must become acutely aware of how we've adopted behaviors that do not value the Black woman for the goddess she is. If we are sincere, most Black women have stood with us historically and currently, at least until the recent gender wars have brought this into question. Yes, more of our queens seem to be falling for this divisive rhetoric, but for Black men, it is our failure to honor and protect our women in the first place that gave a gateway to this brewing environment. I'm not pointing the finger, but I am speaking about the responsibility we, as Black kings, must take to turn this around. I am guilty too, but feeling unsupported by our queens is a weak position to remain in. Unfortunately, any man settling on this position, I lost my place, sorry. Unfortunately, any man settling on this position will probably never see the actual value of the black woman and therefore fail to ever enter into a healthy marriage with one as well, if at all. Although we should admit the increasing number of black men complaining about the lack of support from black women directly results from the loss of intact nuclear families in the black community over the past 60 years. As a community, we must recognize any effort to improve our collective economics, education, mental or physical health, etc., are all for naught if we fail to heal the fundamental relationship between the black man and black woman. The cornerstone of robust communities is strong families, period. The first step is for kings to respect and protect all queens as our own sisters and mothers. They are worthy of respect and adoration, regardless of how they may carry themselves, simply because they are the givers of life. Although I must say to the queens, there is a great deal of power in how you carry yourselves that will make us kings fall in line and naturally want to protect you. Despite my suggestion that men respect women no matter what, like it or not, this suggestion does not recognize how men and women in general are inherently wired differently, and this has nothing to do with social constructs. Like I always tell my closest sisters when they seek my advice about men, I ask, do you want to keep explaining to me how us men should be, or do you want to listen and allow me to explain how we truly are? Just my 3 cents. All I ask is that you think. So I'm gonna play a little commercial to end this thing out because I want to highlight that the mental dialogue live experience is back. Oh, Michelle just jumped on. All right, Queen, I'm gonna give you a little time on this thing with me. What you got for me? Let's make it. I've been
I've,
on.
I've been on here, man. Nah, I'm joking. I couldn't find a link. But so the comment in the chat on YouTube, we were
Okay.
having a little sidebar conversation, and I think it started with saying that the boastful mediocrity or minimum requirements or whatever I said is often more harmful and hurtful than not.
Yeah, that's fair.
And then it kind of led into
Yeah, that makes
how
sense.
not only anecdotally, because this is a seems to be a little more universal than we would like to admit across cultures as well, is that people co-parenting and home parenting, married, whatever, the woman is doing the vast amount of rearing. Like there's so many things mentally and emotionally that we just do because we're mothers, where we are the person when the kid gets hurt, they not looking for y'all. They looking for us. It's like, oh well, there was this one commercial where like this kid's running through the house asking everybody if they saw the mother, and then everyone's like, oh, she's over there, she's over there, she's over there. Anyway, but he just wanted something that everybody else had, and he's like, your father is right there. You wanted a sandwich, he's in the kitchen. Ask your father, but that's not what kids do. Anyway, so the point of that, the anecdotal conversation was, it was this lady, and this started in the mom group. It was this lady in the mom group, and her husband was either working from home or he was off or something, whatever. She had like a 10-month-old, and at that, it was like midday. It was nap time. She hadn't eaten yet. She's dirty. The kid was sick, throwing up all over the place, throwing spaghetti. And so she hasn't eaten. She's dirty. She's tired. She puts the baby down for a nap. The baby's crying because that's what the baby do before the nap time. And the father comes out of wherever he was, picks up he first finds her, searches her out as she's looking for, as she's making food. And he's like, oh, the baby's crying. She can hear the baby. The baby's not far. The baby's fine. She's like, I know. And then she makes her food. And he's like, oh, the baby's crying. And she's like, I know, leave him. He goes, gets the baby for like 2 minutes, hushes the baby up. And I guess he gets a call or whatever. And then he hands her the baby. And then she's breaking down crying on live because all she wants to do is eat and take a shower. And it's like, that is
So can I,
sadly
can I
not extreme.
so can I ask? I personally, tell me if I'm wrong, but I personally feel like that's a very different conversation than what we had tonight.
Oh yeah, I was just explaining what we were, how we had the offshoot.
Okay, I wasn't
sometime.
asking that. I was just trying to make sure I understood what you were saying about.
Yes, that was a totally
got you.
Tangential thing. But the way that it was connected is that we were talking about co-parenting and single parenting and having men be responsible, but even men who are married and who had children within marriage often don't understand.
You already disagreed. That's a different conversation. So I'm not trying to do that conversation tonight. It's a completely different conversation. So you understand? I don't want to start a new conversation.
No, it's 10 o'clock. I'm tired. I just got done working out.
Yeah. So I don't want to do a different conversation because now you're talking about how well is somebody fathering, and I'm not trying to dismiss that, but that comes down between the man and woman and what they figure out for themselves, and and I know that can be difficult. That's going to forever exist amongst two people that at least have agreed to stick together. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's a completely different conversation than just the idea of us as a culture thinking that there are more deadbeats in our culture than there really are, and they are a very serious problem. Some people hear me highlighting the reality that the majority of fathers are involved is as if I'm suggesting deadbeats are not a problem. They're going to become a bigger problem if we don't marry our women. Dude, does that make sense? Because that's the bigger point that I wanted to make. I see another comment. One thing that has not been mentioned is a case of women keeping fathers away from their children and then calling those men deadbeats. Yeah, it hasn't been mentioned. And let me say this real quick, Ephraim. Again, the context that I was really just wanting to highlight, and I'm personally simplifying it because that is a point too. But I'll say similar to me challenging Michelle here that again she's making a point about how involved fathers are even when they're together.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a different conversation. So I'm gonna say to you, Ephraim, that's slightly a different conversation as well because I'm not talking about, as you're saying, the people that are called deadbeats, but as you said, because the mother is making an effort to keep them away. Even if I include those men as the deadbeats, they still don't outnumber the men that are already at home and the mothers who will easily claim the father is handling his business, even though they don't live together. So even if they're incorrectly thrown in as deadbeats, I'm still saying the numbers still point to the majority of black men are not deadbeats, despite the narrative. So I hope what I'm saying, Ephraim, makes sense. A good point by you, but I'm saying even if they're thrown in the category wrong, they still don't outnumber the brothers that are handling their business. And I'll say this to your point, for a brother who is in that situation who may be mislabeled a deadbeat, it does speak to the bigger point, which I know you understand this already, that I've already made. We've accepted the narrative that most black men are deadbeats without realizing the majority of black men want to be involved, which is really kind of why I'm pretty sure that's why you're making the point. So if you are labeled a deadbeat, but you're not allowed based on the contention with you and the baby mother, it still speaks to the bigger point. And our culture, let me see what you think of this, Michelle, and I'll let you go. Mm-hmm. I think it really matters that we understand the reality is that the majority of black men want to be involved, even to Ephraim's point. That's something that our culture actually refuses to believe, but it's actually factual. And if more of our culture believed it, I think we would come up with better solutions than right now the band-aids that we're applying with a belief about a false narrative. Just tell me if you understand my summary.
I do understand what you're saying.
You can challenge it.
No. Okay, so like I do honestly and truly understand what you're saying, and to a point, I even agree with it. Right. So, and I agree, and I don't want to go into whatever my own situation, but wanting to be involved and being able to be involved where you're not causing mayhem and havoc are two very different things.
So much so that if we accept the narrative I just mentioned, now we get to have that conversation more. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do.
Because that's the conversations we need to be having. We need to be challenging, because I said earlier, right? The men who are getting credit based on believing that the most men are deadbeats, because unfortunately, some of the deadbeats are touching several mothers. So there's a lot of mothers who have this result. So therefore we believe that it's more men. So some men are getting credit, like you said, even just from wanting to be involved, and that ain't enough. And it's harder to do from outside. And unfortunately, what never goes away is, men who are if a man's going to be abusive, then you shouldn't be together. I mean, that's always going to be the case.
Yeah.
So yeah, if a man's wanting to be involved and is abusive in any way, even if it's not directly to you.
So I wasn't even saying like abusive though. Like I don't want to. So it's like 1 foot in, 1 foot out doesn't do much when I'm up at 2:00 in the morning because the kid is sick, or I gotta deal with a kid crying at a presentation because daddy's not there.
So that's my point.
Yeah, no, I get it. I just didn't want you to think the abuse was involved.
No, yeah, that's fair. But yeah, that's fair. That's very fair. You're right. Let's get that clear because I don't want to make. I went too far with it. But what I'm saying is that's what we've settled for. We've normalized allowing you having to do that every 2:00 in the morning. You know what I mean? I only got to do it on the weekend sometimes, right? I'm only doing it every other weekend, or I'm doing it every. My father, I would go with my father's every weekend. I was older by that time, so he still didn't have to get up at 2:00 in the morning when I was sick. He got
or in the summer, or never.
Yeah, right. But I'm just pointing out, because we've normalized it, we've accepted that, and I'm saying when we are honest about the dialogue, now we can have a dialogue about what you're talking about, what it should be. Because right now, what you just said, you're getting credit in the current environment, but the environment is not true. It's not that the majority of Black men are involved or are deadbeats. No, y'all are getting credit, but what does that look like? And it's harder to do that from outside the family. That's a reality that our culture needs to speak to. And I think we can't get there by continuing to believe that the majority of men are deadbeats when the numbers don't point to that. So now I think it has to lead to, well, since we're still having this much trouble in the community, what should we be doing? We're not having that conversation because we're accepting a false narrative, in my opinion.
Can I bring up one more thing? Yeah, I think it was Ephraim. I'm not sure who it was because I can't see the comment. But and I, as a woman and as a single parent, would never do this, no matter what. I take it back. I would be remiss to do this, no matter what the situation. And I have often discouraged other people from doing this. But I understand certain situations where the father isn't necessarily physically abusive, but mentally abusive to the child. And then he has to be removed from the situation. But that's like the only time I would be like, all right, he can't be in the situation because he's hurting more than helping. It's like if like every time you see your kid, you got a scrutiny or something else, or you got 5, 6, 7 women around them doing this, and you're doing drugs.
Yeah. Like see,
it's stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, what happens is, I don't care what your situation is. None of us should be encouraging any type of abuse. So, and nobody does. You know what I mean? So, and I'm being dismissive from this standpoint. From this standpoint, just meaning that, I've always said to my girlfriend, my women friends who had children, especially when we were younger, that if you know that your child is safe with him, then there's never a reason to avoid it, right? But the minute you think they're not safe, nobody is telling you to allow that to happen. I don't care if it's your husband or a boyfriend or somebody you slept with one time. You understand what I'm saying? So there's no disagreement, I think, from anyone on the example you just gave. And so I'm talking about in general, making a better decision on who we have our children with, because ultimately we need to be in the homes with them. And that's not going to get challenged if we keep believing the majority of brothers are already deadbeats.
True.
And that's the ultimate conversation today, because what happened was when this conversation got challenged from a week and a half ago, I was told I was being intellectually dishonest with the numbers. This is not about me defending myself. It was a bigger point, which I just made, that I wanted to go. And in addition to that, it was also suggested that me falsifying or telling the numbers wrong doesn't help the community. And I'm saying this conversation absolutely helps, because I am challenged in what we're currently doing, that the numbers actually show we're not okay. And there are going to be more deadbeats born if they're not growing up with the example of a father who is taking care of not only them as their father, but the mother too. It all goes hand in hand, and we've accepted it as unnecessary and as a culture. And it's time for us to own that. And we're not going to own it if we keep exaggerating a narrative that was handed to us that's not true. So the truth matters in having a better conversation. A proper assessment gives you better solutions. Believing a false narrative will make you come up with solutions that are undoable.
Mm-hmm. No, I get it.
That's why I challenge bad narratives, even if I agree or disagree with them. Most think that I am just trying to cape for men. And again, the first thing the meme said was most black men hate deadbeats. Some of us from our own experience, or we literally know how much work, those fathers, I'm not a father, those fathers know how much work it is to raise their children, and they look down upon men who are not going to step up on their responsibility. And those two men never interact, because you checking that man there's men that'll go to jail before they pay their child support. So it don't matter if 10 of good brothers go talk to that man, he'll go to jail before he pays child support. So what's 10 good brothers going to do to talk
or
to him?
pay $1 so that he doesn't have to go to jail.
But I'm just saying, we think we can hold those men accountable when the reality is we need to be at home teaching provision to our children and hoping they listen to us. And most will if you were around. If you're not there enough, they're going to learn from the streets like a lot of us did. And it takes us longer, and African-American males live out extended adolescence, myself included, longer than we should. And that ends up harming the community. And sometimes even a decent brother has a oops baby because of the extended adolescence. He might handle his business and then marry later, but the first child still feels deprived, and sometimes feeling deprived, they lead a life and copy that too. So nobody's getting married, and we're repeating. And some of those children, boys and girls, are never going to think of the best decision I could make is who I'm going to raise my child with. They'll have a child and normalize doing it in separate homes. It can be done, but when you normalize it, it's a problem. And that's why our community looks like it did on that stat that I played. So with that said, thank you for jumping on with me, Queen. I'm gonna play another little share screen just to highlight for Michelle. I think you told me you're in Georgia, right? You are in Georgia. I don't want to call exactly.
I moved. You was about to put me on blast, man.
Yeah. But I'm putting it out because I want to invite you, since you're here, invite you to come up next Friday for the live experience.
All right, I'll come up.
Yeah,
well, I'll try to. I'm not gonna make no promises.
Yeah, I can dig it. I'm gonna play this commercial and we're out of here.
All right.
All right, I'm gonna share the screen and we out of here. Thanks for jumping on with me, Michelle. Hope y'all understand. Again, you don't have to agree with me, but I want people to think about there's a higher conversation than arguing over whether most men are deadbeats or not. Like literally, people were holding on to that. And it ain't even reality. And if I'm interpreting the numbers wrong, please come share with me how I'm doing so. But when
I'm a data scientist and his numbers are real.
Thank you. Oh, a data science backed me up. So she know I ain't bringing bullshit numbers. Thank you for that. I don't play with the numbers. I would never be. I love us too much to lie to us. I may be wrong, but I won't know something and tell people or make up a narrative just for the sake of making it up. Most brothers want to be involved. Let's take advantage of taking that to the next level. With that said, here's the commercial and we out this piece. All right, share screen. I'm always slow at this. All right, here we go.
BSA, Black Socrates announcement live from Jamaica, man. The Mental Dialogue live experience is Black, September the 16th, 7 p.m. at Urban Grind. We Black, y'all. Dialogue and connect. That's what we do best. For those that don't know about the Mental Dialogue Community Club, we are a nationwide virtual neighborhood where African Americans learn to trade ideas, goods, and services through podcasts and live meetups. We're Black. The Mental Dialogue live experience. Don't miss it. The smartest event in the city where we dialogue and connect. You are a business owner, bring your business cards. We will connect you to people you need. If you're not a business owner, we specialize in connecting individuals to mental health therapists, to financial specialists, to really any area that you need. The neighborhood is vast and wide, but we're back live. We're not all virtual finally. We're Black Live, the Mental Dialogue live experience, Urban Grind, September the 16th at 7 p.m. All I ask is that you think. BSA, Black Socrates announcement live from Jamaica, man.
All right, y'all. We out this piece. So make sure y'all subscribe to the page. I'm gonna put that up real quick so y'all can subscribe to the YouTube. If you're on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to us and please share this with others. With that said, I am out. All I ask is that you think. Hopefully, we made it make sense and raise the culture.